1,000 athletes from 36 nations opened the 9th Winter Games in a colorful pageantry.
Yeah, this is looking like a nice run, and he was definitely making sure.
Glory, honor, the pinnacle of human performance. The Olympic Games represent the best of the sporting spirit. But behind the shining medals and historic records, there is a much darker side, a side where the Olympic dream turns into a nightmare. Athletes who pushed their limits and never came back. Accidents that forever changed the course of competition.
The tug aircraft circles like a sparrowhawk waiting to swoop.
Stories of sacrifice that ended in tragedy. Today, we will explore the most shocking tragedies in Olympic history. Moments that not only shook the world of sports, but also left a lasting mark on global memory. Brace yourself, because some of these stories will leave you breathless. An interrupted flight, the tragic fall of Ignaz Stiefson. A clear sky, a glider soaring through the heights, and a moment that changed everything. The Olympic Games are a stage where human limits are tested, but in 1936, it wasn't strength or speed that captured the world's attention. It was the courage of a man seeking to conquer the skies without an engine. His name was Ignaz Stiefson, a pioneer who, with his ingenuity and bravery, revolutionized aviation and wrote an unforgettable chapter in the history of flight. However, his final flight ended in a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. What happened that day remains one of the most impactful stories in Olympic history. Born in Vienna, Austria, Stiefson was not just a pilot, he was a visionary. After World War I, he became one of the first to demonstrate the existence of thermal currents, a discovery that would forever change motorless flight. Thanks to him, future glider pilots would learn to harness these upward currents to stay airborne, breaking the limitations of human flight. His talent and achievements earned him the honor of representing Austria at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, where gliding would debut as a demonstration sport. For Stiefson, it was the perfect opportunity to show the world how far a person could go by relying solely on the wind and their skill. On August 3, 1936, thousands of spectators gathered to witness his flight. The anticipation was immense. Stiefson was not only one of the event's favorites, but also a symbol of innovation and courage. However, before the official demonstration, he decided to take a practice flight, wanting to ensure that every detail was under control. What happened next, no one could have predicted. As Stiefson ascended, his glider sliced through the air with elegance, its wings extended like those of an eagle dominating the sky. But then something went wrong. Without warning, one of the wings gave way. The structure, which had withstood countless flights, fractured mid-air. Suddenly, the sky was no longer his ally. It became his greatest threat. Stiefson reacted with the speed of a veteran. He knew his only chance was the parachute. He pulled the cord with precision, but the altitude was insufficient. At 700 meters, 2,300 feet above the ground, the parachute didn't have time to fully open. The wind struck his face as his body plummeted at terrifying speed. He tried to maneuver to reduce the impact, but gravity showed no mercy. Within seconds, the impact was inevitable. The crowd fell silent. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. The pioneer who had dared to challenge the skies had met his end on the ground. News of his death spread worldwide. Stiefson was not just an Olympic athlete, he was a symbol of human perseverance and ingenuity. His tragic fall not only shocked those present, but also marked a turning point in the history of motorless flight. But his legacy did not end there. Though his life was cut short, his discoveries continued to inspire generations of pilots. The thermal currents he identified remain key to enabling modern gliders to reach unimaginable heights without engines. Every time a pilot ascends by harnessing these currents, Stiefson's spirit soars alongside them. However, the tragedy left a lingering question. Could the accident have been prevented? Some argue that the structural failure was due to the materials of the time, still under development. Others believe that the pressure to impress the audience led pilots to take unnecessary risks. Whatever the cause, Stephenson's death reminded the world that no matter how high one soars, life always hangs by a thread. Today, his name resonates not only as that of an athlete, but as a man who dreamed of conquering the skies. And although his flight was interrupted too soon, his legacy continues to rise beyond the clouds. Because in the end, some dreams are so great that not even gravity can stop them. A broken promise. The tragic death of Ross Milne. At just 19 years old, Ross Milne traveled to the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck with a dream: to prove that Australia could compete in winter sports. His presence was not just a personal aspiration, it represented a country that, due to its climate and geography, had been overlooked in these types of competitions. Even before the Games, rumours had circulated that Australia and New Zealand might be excluded, on the grounds that their athletes didn't have the same training opportunities as European teams. But Milne and his team were determined to change that perception. Although the conditions were not in their favour, the small Australian delegation travelled to Austria with the hope of making their mark on history, and Ross, considered their most promising skier, arrived ready to defy expectations. However, the scene they found in Innsbruck was far from ideal. An unexpected lack of snow forced organisers to transport snow from other regions of Austria to build the slopes. But this improvised solution wasn't enough to ensure the athletes' safety. The downhill skiing course, designed to challenge the world's best, lacked protective barriers to prevent crashes into trees and other natural obstacles. Additionally, sandbags placed at strategic points provided minimal protection against the speeds of up to 70 km/h, 43 miles per hour, that competitors reached. Several local journalists pointed out the dangers of the course. Yet despite the warnings, organisers decided to proceed without modifications. On January 25, 1964, Ross Milne began his first practice run with determination. During the first 300 meters, 984 feet, he demonstrated his skill, navigating the initial curves with agility. But as he reached one of the steepest slopes, something unexpected happened. Several competitors were on the course, blocking his path. To avoid a collision, Ross made a sudden maneuver to the side. However, the movement caused him to lose control, and within seconds, he crashed violently into a tree. The impact was devastating. The young athlete was knocked unconscious instantly. Emergency teams transported him by helicopter to the nearest hospital, but his injuries were too severe. Despite the doctor's efforts, Ross Milne passed away hours after the accident. His death shocked the world of sports and left an indelible mark on the history of the Winter Olympics. It was the second tragedy that occurred before the official start of the competitions. After the accident, an official investigation concluded that the primary cause of the tragedy was Milne's lack of experience. The report argued that, due to his Australian background, the young skier was not accustomed to high-altitude conditions and the extreme speeds of downhill skiing. However, many considered this conclusion unfair. To them, the real problem was the lack of proper safety measures on the course, a negligence that put all competitors at risk. During the opening ceremony of the Olympics, flags flew at half-mast, and a minute of silence was observed in honor of the two athletes who had died. But beyond the tribute, Ross Milne's death raised questions that remain unanswered to this day. Could the tragedy have been prevented if the organizers had taken the warnings about the course's dangers seriously? Despite the sorrow, Ross's story inspired future generations of Australian athletes. His younger brother, determined to honor his memory, competed in those same Olympics and against all odds won a medal, proving that Australia could excel in winter sports. Ross Milne's legacy, though tragically cut short, lives on as a symbol of courage, determination, and the sacrifices sometimes required to pursue a dream. His final ride. The tragic death of Bahman Golbanishad. A war veteran, an athlete who defied the impossible, and one final descent that turned him into a legend. The Paralympic Games are more than a competition. They are a stage where human courage transcends physical limits. But in Rio 2016, what was meant to be a celebration of personal triumph ended in tragedy. Bahman Golbanezad, an Iranian cyclist who had already defied death on the battlefield, met his fate on a fateful curve. What happened that day continues to resonate in the world of sports, not only because of the loss of an athlete, but also because of the life story he left behind. Golbanezad was no ordinary cyclist. His journey to the Paralympic Games began on a very different stage, the Iran-Iraq War. During a confrontation, a landmine exploded near him, resulting in the loss of his left leg. For many, that would have been the end of any athletic dream. For Bahman, it was only the beginning. Instead of giving up, he dedicated himself to weightlifting, where he won 12 gold medals and 1 silver medal in international competitions. However, a shoulder injury forced him to abandon the sport in 2006. But the fighting spirit that had brought him so far did not fade. It was then that he found in cycling a new way to challenge his own limits. Road cycling at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games was no ordinary event. The route, designed through hills and steep descents, tested not only physical endurance, but also skill and control. The sharp curves and high speeds on the slopes meant that any error could be fatal. But for Golbanezad, whose life had been a constant battle against adversity, every kilometer traveled was a declaration of victory. That day, Bahman pedaled with the determination of someone who knows their story can inspire thousands. His speed increased with every meter, and the wind hit his face as he descended one of the most challenging sections of the course. The curve approached quickly. The margin for error was minimal. Then, the unthinkable happened. Golbanezad lost control of his bicycle at the most critical moment. The speed and slope made it impossible to correct his trajectory. His bicycle skidded and veered off the track, crashing violently against a sharp rock. Although he was wearing a helmet, the impact was devastating. Emergency services arrived quickly and transported him to the hospital, hoping to save his life. But on the way, his heart stopped beating. Bahman Golbanezad, the man who had survived a war and defied the limits of the human body, had found his end in the competition he loved most. The news of his death left the Paralympic world in shock, but for his family, the pain was indescribable. His son, who had watched him leave that day with pride, could not imagine it would be the last time he would see his father on a bicycle. The tragedy marked a turning point in the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Yet beyond the sadness, Bahman Golbanezad's story remains etched as a symbol of resilience and determination. Because Bahman did not compete only against other athletes, he competed against the limitations imposed by life. And although his final ride ended too soon, his legacy continues to inspire those who believe that limits exist only to be overcome. In the end, his story is not just that of a cyclist, it is the story of a man who, after losing a leg on the battlefield, refused to lose his dreams as well. And although the race ended tragically, his spirit will continue pedaling in the hearts of all those who dare to challenge the impossible. Was it an unavoidable accident, or could it have been prevented? That is the question that still echoes in the world of sports. But there is one thing no one can deny. With every turn of his bicycle, Bahman Golbanezad proved that true victory is not always about crossing the finish line. It lies in the courage to never give up. A race toward destiny, the tragedy of Francisco Lazaro. A suffocating heat wave, a runner determined to write his name in history, and a decision that would seal his fate forever. The 1912 Stockholm Olympics witnessed unforgettable feats, but also tragedies that left an indelible mark on the world of sports. Among them was the death of Francisco Lazaro, a humble Portuguese carpenter who, in his quest for glory, ended up paying the ultimate price. What happened that day remains a subject of debate, but one thing is certain. His story is a reminder of the risks of pushing the human body to its limits. From the start, the 1912 marathon was expected to be an extreme challenge. With temperatures exceeding 32 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and a relentless sun, many athletes chose not to participate. Of the 95 registered, only 68 dared to face the scorching heat. Among them was Francisco Lazaro, the first Portuguese athlete to compete in the Olympic Games. Despite his humble background, Lazaro had proven his talent by winning 3 national marathon championships in Portugal. His determination led him to Stockholm with a clear goal: to finish the race and make history for his country. However, what few knew was that beneath his uniform, he hid a secret that would change the course of his destiny. On the morning of July 14, 1912, the heat was already intense as the runners lined up at the starting line. The air felt heavy and the sun scorched their skin. But Francisco Lazaro seemed unfazed. With a determined gaze and a heart full of ambition, he uttered the words that would be etched in history: "I will win or die trying." When the starting signal sounded, the athletes began their journey through the streets of Stockholm. The heat was relentless, and each step became more difficult as the sun punished their bodies. Yet Lazaro pressed on, advancing with determination and maintaining his position among the leading runners. His endurance seemed unbreakable. However, as the kilometers wore on, signs of exhaustion began to appear. Dehydration and the extreme heat forced many competitors to abandon the race. But Francisco, driven by his promise to achieve glory, kept going. Then, the inevitable happened. With about 12 kilometers, 7.5 miles remaining, Lazaro's body could take no more. His legs gave out and he collapsed unconscious on the ground. Spectators and race officials rushed to help him. His skin burned as if it were on fire, and his breathing was barely perceptible. His body temperature had reached 41 degrees Celsius, 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit, a lethal level. He was immediately taken to a nearby hospital, but there was little the doctors could do. The damage was irreversible. The next day, Francisco Lazaro passed away without regaining consciousness. He was only 23 years old. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. During the autopsy, doctors found a surprising detail. Lazaro had coated his body with a layer of wax. The reason behind this decision remains a mystery. Some believe he did it to protect himself from the scorching sun, while others suggest he wanted to reduce wind resistance and improve his performance. However, this strategy proved fatal. The wax blocked the pores of his skin, preventing him from sweating and regulating his body temperature. The result was heat stroke, which his body could not withstand. Additionally, doctors discovered that Lazaro had an undiagnosed heart condition, which further worsened the effects of the heat stroke. It was the combination of these factors that turned his ambition into tragedy. His death shocked the sports world and raised serious questions about the limits of the human body. At a time when sports science and athlete safety were still in their infancy, Lazaro's tragedy served as a warning about the dangers of ignoring the body's signals. Over time, the words he spoke before the race became his epitaph: "I will win or die trying." More than a century later, Francisco Lazaro's story remains a symbol of sacrifice and passion. His name is etched in Olympic history, not only as the first Portuguese athlete to compete in the Games, but also as a reminder that the pursuit of greatness should never come at the cost of one's life. Was his fate inevitable, or a tragedy that could have been prevented? The answer continues to be a subject of reflection for athletes and coaches worldwide. Because, in the end, the line between glory and tragedy is thinner than it seems. Lethal speed, the tragedy of Nicolas Bochate. In the Olympic Games, athletes strive to push the limits of the human body, but there are disciplines where that challenge borders on the impossible. Such was the case of speed skiing, an event so extreme that, during the 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France, it claimed the life of Swiss skier Nicolas Bochate. Unlike traditional skiing, where technique and precision are key, speed skiing has one clear objective: to reach the highest speed possible. Competitors wear aerodynamic suits designed to reduce air resistance, sliding down slopes at speeds that can exceed 255 km per h, 158 mph, a figure more typical of a car than a human being. This challenge attracted the boldest athletes, and Nicolas Bochaté was one of them. With years of training and determination, the young Swiss skier had earned his place among the world's best. His performance in Albertville qualified him for the finals, bringing him closer to the most important opportunity of his career. But his pursuit of glory would end in an unexpected tragedy. The morning of February 22, 1992, began like any other competition day. Bochaté and his teammates decided to do a warm-up session before the final, using a nearby public slope. What seemed like a routine practice quickly turned into a chain of fatal events. Leading the group of skiers, Bochaté sped down the slope. As he crested a small hill, he suddenly encountered an unexpected obstacle, a snow grooming machine parked directly in his path. At the speed he was going, there was no time to react. The impact was devastating. The collision with the heavy machine was so violent that Bochaté died instantly. News of his death shocked the organizers and the sports community, leaving an indelible mark on Olympic history. The most surprising aspect of the accident was the silence surrounding it. Despite the magnitude of the tragedy, the thousands of spectators waiting for the final were not informed of what had happened. The competition continued as if nothing had occurred, with no official announcements during the event. The exact circumstances of the accident continue to raise questions. Witnesses claim that the snow grooming machine was parked without any warning signs, leaving Bochaté with no chance to avoid it. Others argue that visibility on the slope was sufficient to detect the obstacle in time. However, the extreme speed at which the skier was descending left little room for any reaction. Another detail that fueled the controversy was the equipment Bochaté was using at the time of the accident. According to some reports, he was not wearing his usual speed skis, but rather slalom skis, designed for a different discipline. This factor raised doubts about whether human error, a lack of communication, or a combination of both contributed to the fatal outcome. Bochaté's death had immediate consequences for the future of speed skiing. The discipline, which was presented as a demonstration sport in 1992, was removed from the Olympic program. The inherent risks of this type of competition proved too high, and Bochaté's accident confirmed that the sport was not yet ready to be officially integrated into the Games. Although speed skiing never returned to the Olympics, the tragedy in Albertville remains engraved in the collective memory of sports. Nicolas Bochaté's story symbolizes the dangers athletes face when striving to surpass their limits. His sacrifice serves as a reminder that in the pursuit of glory, the margins for error are minimal, and the consequences sometimes irreversible. And although his career was cut short too soon, his name remains inscribed as a symbol of the courage and passion that define high-performance sports. The tragedy of the 55-year-old athlete, a high-speed descent, a treacherous track, and an athlete who dared to defy the limits but never reached the finish line. This is the story of Kazimierz Kaz-Kai-Skipski, the man whose passion for sports led him to face one of the most dangerous challenges of the 1964 Winter Olympics. What no one knew was that the track concealed a deadly danger. The 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, Austria, were not only a stage for remarkable athletic feats, but also for a tragedy that would forever mark the history of sports. During this edition, 2 athletes lost their lives due to the hazardous conditions of the tracks. One of them was Kazimierz Kai-Skipski, a 55-year-old athlete whose fatal accident during the luge competition shocked the world. Kazimierz, originally from Poland, but representing Great Britain, was the oldest competitor in the event. His teammates affectionately called him Uncle, a nickname that reflected both his experience and kind nature. Before dedicating himself to sports, he had served as a pilot in the Royal Air Force, which gave him exceptional reflexes and impressive physical endurance. Although his age set him apart from the other competitors, his passion and determination kept him on par with the younger athletes. However, the luge track in Innsbruck posed an even greater challenge than expected. Although the organizers assured that everything was under control, several sections of the course presented dangerous conditions. Patches of ice, saturated with water, made the surface unpredictable, and sharp curves further complicated the descent. Accidents were frequent, and the media began questioning the track's safety. Despite the warnings, authorities decided to proceed with the competition without making any modifications. It was during a practice session before the official competition that tragedy struck. Kazimierz was speeding down the track, skillfully navigating the icy turns. But suddenly, his sled began to wobble dangerously. Control slipped from his hands, and within seconds, he was thrown off the track. The impact against the frozen ground was brutal, leaving spectators and fellow athletes in shock. Emergency services arrived immediately and rushed cars to the nearest hospital. Doctors discovered severe fractures in his skull and pelvis, injuries too severe for his body to withstand. Despite the medical team's best efforts, his heart stopped during emergency surgery the next day. News of his death spread quickly, leaving a deep sense of sorrow within the Olympic community and among all who admired his bravery. Kazimierz's death sparked a wave of unanswered questions. Was his age a determining factor in the accident, or were the unsafe conditions of the track the true cause? Those who knew him defended his skill and experience, insisting that the track's dangerous design had been the main cause of the tragedy. However, the Olympic authorities chose to remain silent and did not implement additional safety measures, allowing the competition to continue as planned. The deadly descent at Vancouver. 2010, the tragedy of Nodar Kumaritashvili. A sled racing at over 140 kilometers per h, a treacherous curve, and a single moment that changed everything. The 2010 Winter Olympics, held in Vancouver, Canada, went down in history not only for their thrilling competitions, but also for a tragedy that left the sports world in shock. Even before the opening ceremony began, the dangerous luge track at the Whistler Sliding Center claimed the life of a young athlete striving for glory, Nodar Kumaritashvili. But was it truly an accident, or a tragedy that could have been prevented? From the start, Whistler's track had instilled fear among athletes. Designed for extreme speeds, it posed a challenge even for the most experienced competitors. Curve 13, nicknamed 50/50ths, was notorious for its risks. Only half of the competitors managed to navigate it without losing control. Days before the tragedy, several athletes had suffered crashes during training, with speeds surpassing 144 kilometers per h, 89 miles per hour. Alarm bells were already ringing. Despite the warnings, the organizers made no significant modifications. The competition would proceed as planned, unaware that something was about to go terribly wrong. Among the participants was Nodar Kumaritashvili, a 21-year-old from Georgia. His family had dedicated generations to luge, and Nodar dreamed of following in their footsteps. For him, these Olympic Games were the opportunity to showcase his talent to the world. But what was meant to be his defining moment would become his final descent. It was the morning of February 12th, 2010. Snow blanketed the mountains of Whistler, and the glistening, icy track awaited athletes for one last training session before the official competition. Nodar adjusted his helmet, took a deep breath, and assumed his starting position. He knew that speed was both his greatest ally and his worst enemy. With a firm push, his sled began to glide down the track. The acceleration was immediate. He navigated the first curves with precision, feeling adrenaline surge through his body. His speed increased with each passing second. Curve 10 was behind him, then 11, then 12. Only one remained. The infamous curve 13. At 144 kilometers per h, any mistake comes at a high price. A slight miscalculation, a moment of hesitation, and everything can end. As Nodar approached the curve, his sled grazed the outer edge of the track, destabilizing for an instant. But at that speed, an instant was all it took. The sled spun out of control, and Nodar was ejected from the icy channel. What happened next was devastating. His body struck a steel pillar without any protective padding. The impact was brutal. Paramedics arrived within seconds, but his injuries were too severe. Nodar Kumaritashvili died before he could receive medical assistance. News of his death spread around the world within minutes. The atmosphere in Vancouver changed instantly. During the opening ceremony, the Georgian team marched with black armbands in mourning, and thousands observed a moment of silence to honor the young athlete. But the tragedy did not end there. The official investigation concluded that the accident was due to athlete error. According to the report, Nodar had lost control of his sled due to a miscalculation. However, many refused to accept that explanation. Even before the games, warnings had been raised that the Whistler track was too fast and dangerous. Curve 13 in particular had caused multiple crashes due to its design and the high speeds athletes reached. So, was it really Nodar's fault? Technical reports revealed that the track had been designed for much lower speeds. The combination of tight curves and steep slopes, along with the lack of proper safety measures, turned any error into a potential death sentence. Furthermore, the steel pillars lining the track had no protective padding to absorb impacts. After the tragedy, the organizers rushed to make emergency modifications. The walls of Curve 13 were raised to prevent athletes from being thrown out of the track, and the steel pillars were covered with protective padding. But these measures came too late for Nodar Kumaritashvili. His death left a question that still echoes in the world of sports. Could the tragedy have been prevented if organizers had heeded the warnings? For his friend and teammate, Levan Gurashidze, the loss was devastating. After witnessing the accident, Levan decided to retire from luge, unable to continue without his friend by his side. Today, the story of Nodar Kumaritashvili remains a reminder of the risks athletes face in their pursuit of glory. His name is etched in the collective memory as a symbol of the sacrifice and passion demanded by high-performance sports. But it also serves as a wake-up call to ensure that, in the quest for Olympic gold, safety is never again overlooked. What do you think? Was it an athlete's error or negligence that could have been avoided? Olympic glory has always been the dream of those who seek to push the limits of body and spirit. But as we've seen, that path is sometimes marked by tragedies that leave indelible scars in the history of sports. From the skies of Berlin to the icy tracks of Vancouver, each of these stories reminds us how fragile the line between victory and loss can be. However, their names have not been forgotten. Ignaz Stiefson, Ross Milne, Barman Golbanishad, Francisco Lazaro, Nicolas Bochate, and Kazimierz Skipski left a legacy that goes beyond their final moments. They taught us that passion, determination, and the desire to achieve the impossible are the true reasons why their stories continue to inspire the world. Were their fates inevitable, or tragedies that could have been prevented? That is the question that will continue to echo. But beyond the answers, their lives remain a reminder of the importance of learning from every fall, and of always striving to find a balance between ambition and safety. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the most impactful stories in Olympic history. If this journey has moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. Which of these stories impressed you the most? Do you think these tragedies could have been avoided? We'd love to hear your opinion. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the stories that shaped the world. Until next time.